in our series of Meet a Columban. Today we have with us Father Patrick McInerney, which is who is a very interesting man. During the week we had advertised that we'd have a lay missionary, a Filipino lay missionary from Fiji, who would be able to speak to us today. But unfortunately for us, she is on an island, a small island in the Fiji group, but Marge will be with us next week. So thank you very much, Patrick, for making yourself available for today's interview. And I'll just start by, if you wouldn't mind, just telling us a little bit of who you are and where you come from.
Very well. Good evening, Trevor, and good evening, everybody. Delighted to be able to share with you a little bit about my life and work as a Columban missionary priest. So I come from South Australia originally. I grew up there on the family farm. It was just outside of a small town called Manoora. It's in the heart of the Gilbert Valley. And the Gilbert Valley is happily situated between the Clare Valley and the Barossa Valley, both very famous, of course, as wine-producing areas. And the Gilbert Valley and our farm was wheat and wool. So I like to think that it was a very Eucharistic upbringing. We produced the grain for the wheat, and the Clare and the Barossa, of course, produced the wine. So we had bread and wine.
Are you saying that you were kind of destined, therefore, for priesthood or something?
Well, I think it might have been somewhat the prayers of my mother. As we were a traditional Catholic family of Irish background, as you can tell from my name, McInerney. And there was the family rosary every day in the evening. And on Sundays, it was everyone pile into the car and we'd go to Sunday Mass. And sometimes there was benediction in the afternoon. I was the sixth of 6 children. So in relative terms, a large family and a very happy family. And of course, growing up on a farm, we had space to play and we had our jobs as well, milking the cows and collecting the eggs and just being part of the life and work of the farm and went to the local school. So my memories of childhood are basically of a very happy, pleasant time.
So did you come then straight from school to the seminary, or did you have any time in between, as some have had?
No, at that time, I'd been to secondary school at boarding with the Christian Brothers at Trevor in Adelaide. And when I was thinking about my career, my life, what I would do with it, as I said, traditional Catholic upbringing, so quite a pious young lad, I suppose. And I thought to myself that the God question is the most important question that people have to answer in their lives. Who is God for us? Who is Jesus Christ? And I looked around, and even in my own small district at that time, in my hometown, there were 3 or 4 churches. And I had a couple of cousins who were in the seminary and ordained for the Diocese of Adelaide. And so I thought, well, for people in Australia, there's lots of opportunities in churches for people to find the answers to those questions. And I thought of the many millions of people in other parts of the world who do not have the same ready access to the gospel message. And I thought, this is the most important question, and these are the biggest audience. And as a generous sort of Superman idea, I would give myself to this great cause of the mission of the church, the international mission of the church. And when I looked around, the Columbans were the ones who I knew were the ones that were missionaries. We received the Far East in our home, so it was reading Mickey Daly's diary was part of my childhood education in learning how to spell. And of course, my parents had a great regard for priests, and that was probably part of the motivation of giving my life to this wonderful cause.
So you went through the seminary, you were ordained. Did you arrive where were you sent to in order to spread the message?
I was ordained in 1978, and I was among the first group of Columbans appointed to Pakistan.
Oh.
And it was the first time the Columbans were going there. It was a bit controversial. I know that there was some comment about it was inappropriate to send newly ordained priests to a place like Pakistan. It was a hard place. It was like sending lambs among wolves, to quote the Gospel, the Old Testament. But we went there as a group. We'd met together already in Turramurra in Sydney as a group in terms of preparation to go there. So we had a lot of fraternal support with each other in going to this new place. And I was really delighted actually to have this opportunity to go to a new place. I thought rather than following in someone else's footsteps, we would create the path ourselves. We would be the pioneers. We would be the real missionaries, of course. And when I arrived there, of course, there were the Belgian missionaries, the Capuchins who'd been there for nearly 100 years, and the diocese was celebrating its centenary within a few years of my arrival. So I was certainly following in the footsteps of great missionaries in Pakistan as well.
So, how long were you in Pakistan, and what sort of things did you do?
I was assigned to Pakistan for just over 20 years.
Wow.
The first task was learning the language, and that was hard work, and it was about 16 months. Just day in and day out, and it's very humbling and very humiliating when you can't even say the most basic things, and you have to really become a baby all over again as an adult and learn to speak. Then I was assigned to a parish, and it was a very happy time in that parish. I like to think of it as my honeymoon years. It was the first time I was functioning as a priest in a parish and fulfilling my life's ambition. And I remember the first Easter that I had been through the entire Easter ceremonies in Urdu. And I felt that was such a fantastic achievement that I had done this and done it reasonably well in another language. And so my memories of that first parish, of course, as I say, it's my honeymoon parish, very happy time.
But I mean, you talk about parishes, but Pakistan is fairly largely Muslim, right?
That's correct. It's about 96% Muslim. So after one term in Pakistan, I was happy to go to Rome to study Arabic and Islamics. We felt as a group that we needed someone who had some background in Islam because that was the majority population of the country. So I went to an institute, it's called the Pontifical Institute for the Study of Arabic and Islamics. The acronym is PISI. So the fact that it's a pontifical institute just shows you how seriously the Catholic Church takes dialogue, that there's a university, a pontifical university, that prepares people for working in Muslim majority countries. So I spent 3 years there in Rome doing those studies.
So you were studying Islam, and I presume to do that you'd have to learn some Arabic or something.
I studied Islam. I studied the basics of Islam, the history, the Quran, the life of the Prophet, and so on, and the law, Sharia, and all those things. And yes, part of the course was learning Arabic language, and that was again really difficult. Of course, the sources for Islam, the Quran is written in Arabic, the Hadith materials, the accounts of the Prophet's life and works, they're all written in Arabic. So learning Arabic is sort of the high road, if you like, of engaging with Islam. But it was a lot of effort. But of course, when I returned to Pakistan, Arabic was not spoken there, except among the scholars. So it was a lot of work. It's very important for scholars to have this sort of knowledge. It's useful for me to have a background, but I don't speak it. I never became a fluent speaker of Arabic.
Right. So you arrived back in Pakistan and you've got this degree with you. How were you able to use it, or what was sort of like the second wave, so to speak, the second experience, the second immersion like?
This, the second wave was again getting involved in parishes, and I did have a few opportunities to engage. There was some of the fledgling efforts at dialogue were getting underway at that time. I was actually representing the diocese for a time on the National Commission for Interreligious Relations. But when it's such a big majority and such a small minority, there's such disparity that it's quite difficult. And one of the better ways of engaging in that context is perhaps what's called the dialogue of life or the dialogue of action. It's where people work together on social issues. And that's probably the best way to address, and of course there are many social issues in Pakistan, illiteracy, social issues, health, welfare, all those sorts of things. And Christians and Muslims suffer equally from the consequences of bad government and poor service. And so when they collaborate together on those sorts of issues, they can get better outcomes for themselves.
So you were the only Columban, of course, in Pakistan at that time. How many of the guys would have been working there with you?
The numbers, when we first went there, we were a group of 6, and the numbers increased a little bit. I think then the lay missionaries were also assigned there. At the absolute peak, astonishingly, we were around about 30 people, which is amazing.
Wow.
And, that included a number of about 10 lay missionaries. So, and there were also FMA, First Mission Assignment, Columban seminarians, students on appointment there. So that sort of boosted the numbers. But an operating group of around about a dozen, perhaps for most of the time I was there.
You mentioned the lay missionaries. Where did they come from? What countries did they come from?
The first group and subsequent groups, some of them came from the Philippines, and there were also some who came from England and Ireland.
Okay, all right. But now you've been back in Australia, you've been quite prominent in the whole issue of interreligious dialogue in Australia. How did you arrive back here and what have you been doing?
Well, after 20 years, and I'd been in leadership for the last 7 of those years, I took advice from a colleague of mine, Father Noel Connolly, and he had told me he felt that Columbans who stayed in the same place and did the same thing over and over and over again for a lifetime, they tended to become very narrow. But he said if they go somewhere else and do something different, even if they return to that same place, they will still, they'll do the job a little bit differently because they had a different experience. So I thought that was very sound advice and was happy to accept an appointment to Australia. And so I came here and I did some studies initially in Melbourne. I did a master's in theology, and later I did a PhD in theology. So I was getting my academic credentials up to scratch, and I was appointed to Sydney, to the Columban Centre for Christian Muslim Relations, and my life experience over the previous 20 years in Pakistan, of course, gave me credibility.
Yes, yeah.
And my studies in Arabic and Islamics, and then in Christian theology, gave me competence. So I was very fortunately situated as a Columban, that I had both experience, credibility, and academic competence. So I was able to bring these 2 gifts together and contribute them to the area of interreligious dialogue here in Sydney and, in fact, broader across Australia.
So obviously a lot of work over a number of years, and now you are working in this Columban Centre for Christian Muslim Relations, and it's based in the western part of Sydney. Could you tell us a bit about that and what you're doing with that?
Sure. The Columban Centre for Christian Muslim Relations is located in Blacktown, which is possibly the geographical hub of the Sydney Basin. And it's part of the Diocese of Parramatta. And Western Sydney is where there is such great religious diversity. So I think we're ideally situated as a centre I have two colleagues working with me currently. Ryan Epondulan is a young man, and Kim Chong is a young woman. The three of us make up the team. We work together, and we have a good relationship among ourselves and good collaboration, and we bring different skills to the job. So it's a very fruitful team.
You mentioned that Blacktown being sort of like the centre of the basin. It reminds me, one of the things that I see reported that you're working on is the Sydney Statement. There's something that you're working towards. Would you kind of fill us in and fill some of the people who are watching this program in as to what you're doing with that?
Sure. I probably need to give you a little bit of background. First of all, one of the things that we do is we go out and attend events. We go to Muslim events, faith events, cultural events, interfaith events. We are a presence on the scene of interfaith. And one of the things that I realized early on, attending all these events, as I looked around, I realized that the Catholic participants in particular tended to be grey-haired.
Oh, right.
And one of the things I realized is, if this apostolate of interfaith is to continue, then young people, young adults have to be involved in this. So with one of our employees at the time, who was a young person, we developed a program which we called Youth Power, POWR, Parliament of the World's Religions. So Youth Power brings together young adults from different religions to meet each other, to get to know each other, to have discussion, and to have a voice and a vote in shaping our multi-religious, multicultural society. So one of the projects that we entrusted to Youth Power was the one that you mentioned, Trevor, the Sydney Statement. Now, the Sydney Statement will be a charter for interfaith relations for Sydney and beyond. And so we had 4 consultations with young people. Over 200 young people attended the consultations, and they gave us suggestions and ideas for building the sort of ideal multicultural society that we would like to have. We took all their suggestions, and they've been written up now into a document, and it's been a very serious drafting process this past year. I can tell you that our current draft is draft 15.
Oh, wow.
which shows you how serious we've been about the process. And it's on the cusp of being published. Okay. But because it's a Youth Power project, we will bring it to Youth Power and they will vote on it. I mean, it's their project, it's their voice. They will vote on it and they will publish it and they will authorize it, and it will be published then on a dedicated website. And it lists principles and values and explains a little bit our context, and it names 21 commitments, the sorts of things that people could do to build relations or build bridges between believers from different religions. And they are spread out over a variety of, some of the things are what we call the dialogue of life. So it's living out one's faith in relations with others. Some of them are the dialogue of action that I mentioned, working together on social projects. The dialogue of knowledge is getting to know each other better, learning about each other's doctrines and teachings. The dialogue of religious experience, of spirituality, sharing what God means in our lives. And an intra-faith dialogue is talking with our own communities to promote the apostolate of interfaith within our own community so that more and more people take it up.
Right. We're kind of running close to time, of course. You've dedicated your whole life to this, so I can imagine we could talk for some time. But you're talking that bit about people educating other people about it. You've done some good job in doing this. I have a couple of books here that if I can show you, one called 10 Things Everyone Needs to Know About Islam. Fortunately, it's not a big book, but I just have to learn to read this properly. So it's got a nice cover on it. And obviously that must have done well because you've got a second one, 10 more things. I think that makes 20. Somehow or other you've kind of added all this up. So these books that you've put together, Pat, from very many great resources, of course, and out of the experience you've been talking about, they're all available here from our Columban Centre down here in Sydney. And of course, they're on the website, on the Columban website. I have another one here also that I need to advertise. This is the Golden Rule. And this will be, I'm told, a great resource for people working in schools or in parishes. Very practical. Pat, would you like to say something about the Golden Rule?
Sure. The Golden Rule is treat others as you want to be treated. And variations of this text are found in the sacred scriptures or the sacred texts of virtually all of the world's religions. So it's found in the Hadith, it's found in the Old Testament, it's found in the Hindu scriptures, in the Buddhist teachings, and so on. So it's found in all the religions. It's a common value, and it teaches us how to relate with each other. It's even found in modern text language, when people say, tweet each other as you want to be tweeted.
Oh, lovely idea.
So the fact that this is a common value and it's authoritative because it's in sacred scriptures and it's accessible. We all know when we've been treated well. We all know when we've been treated badly. So it's easy for us to know then how we should treat others.
Yeah.
So,
well, and the news stories this week about how Twitter and all that has been used in a negative fashion. People have been trolled, etc. So that simple little message is one that's easily said, I suppose, but is powerful to live out.
And it's good that you mentioned it. It's one of the things that we do is we maintain a strong presence on social media, and we keep trying to tell positive stories to counter some of the negativity and the ignorance and the fear and the suspicion that is out there. So we're constantly trying to build good relations between peoples from different religions. And we think this is part of the gospel message of reconciliation. It's part of sharing the good news.
Yeah, and there are a lot of resources obviously coming out of your centre, Pat, so I'm sure if anybody wants to find anything more, like papal statements, the Pope has made lots of statements about this. And you mentioned one of the groups in Rome, a congregation, they brought out something recently, some document.
The Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, in collaboration with the World Council of Churches, have produced a document just this week, and it's called Serving a Wounded World in the Time of COVID-19.
All right.
So it's a current document, and it's a Christian document. It's obviously from the Catholic Church and the World Council of Churches, but it has an interreligious context, because even though it's addressed to Christians, it acknowledges that in terms of the COVID virus, we're all in the same boat. We're all affected by it. Our economies are affected by it. Our families and friends have suffered in various ways because of it. And we have a responsibility as believers to care for those who are suffering, for those who are sick, for the dying, for the bereaved, and for those who are at loss of livelihood and so on. But we need to do this together. There's a wonderful line that Pope Francis used in an address in the United Arab Emirates in February last year. He said, "We need to build our future together, or we will not have a future." And in our globalized world, that is true. We are all affected by the COVID. We belong together. We're a human community, so we must show human solidarity, fraternity, care for one another as sisters and brothers, and for the entire creation, in fact.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I mean, thank you for your passion that has sort of, lived through all the years in Pakistan and continues through to the present day. So you do wonderful work for the Australian Church, and I'm very pleased to have met a Columban like you. So thank you and God bless.
Thank you, Trevor, and God bless to all the listeners.
Thank you.